All right, guys, we are live now,
Okay,
please.
we're live. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Esther Mary, and I'll be moderating for EcoCarbon. This webinar is tagged for Earth Day, and our host and our facilitator today is Farozi Efan. He will be taking us some subjects, most especially biodiversity, which will be his core topic, but then he'll be talking about recycling and climate change, climate education in context to climate financing. Yeah. So I'll hand over now to F1, who is an award-winning storyteller, to put us through with his presentation. Thank you.
Well, hello to all. I hope you all are doing well. Thank you very much for having me for this event. Well, I'm Irfan Firouzi, an award-winning storyteller, speaker, environmentalist, educator, conservationist, naturalist, author, researcher, innovator, and a World Wildlife Fund leader of change, along with the Abu Dhabi Environmental Agency Green Youth Majlis biodiversity storytelling leader. Well, part of my research, most of my research, has focused on the loss of our planet's biodiversity. I was born at a point in the midst of the point where we were losing majority of our wild spaces, our planet's biodiversity. And it was upsetting to see what was happening throughout the world. From the loss of glaciers to the extinction of different creatures, I believe that the initial and the main cause of climate change is biodiversity loss. I mean, just sit and think about it. Just 100 or 200 or so years back, we were having fairly stable lives. We were dependent on natural world as very much as we are today. And we had a stable planet. Why was that? I mean, we were in the point which we call the Holocene, and the temperatures only fluctuate between 1 and -1 degree Celsius. And I tell you that this was all because of the majority and the amazing variety of biodiversity of life on Earth, the amazing biodiversity of creatures that stood there. But as the beginning of Industrial Revolution and our less dependence on the natural world, we became to dominate the planet. We began cutting down trees, reducing habitats, releasing huge amounts of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And this resulted in what we are facing today, the 6th mass extinction. But before I touch on that point, let's take a look at, let's say, what is mainly biodiversity. Biodiversity is the variety of life on Earth. And scientists have estimated that there are around 8.7 million species of plants and animals in existence. Of course, majority of which we may not even have discovered, and majority of which that could be going extinct as of now, which we don't even know of. The extraordinary thing is that since the 1900s, the Earth's average surface air temperatures increased by around 1.8 degrees Celsius, that 1.8 degree Fahrenheit, with over half of our increase occurring since the mid of 1970s. So as we increase carbon, we are reducing the glaciers on the poles. They help reflect sunlight away from the Earth's surface, keeping our whole planet cool. And as a result, we are seeing the impacts of climate change throughout the world, from UAE to Antarctica, to itself in Africa, for example, with the severe droughts killing millions of organisms. But climate change and biodiversity loss are not the only problems we are throwing to the natural world. Plastic is also among the biggest problems. At least 14 million tons of plastic ends up in the oceans every year, and plastic makes up around 80% of all marine debris found from the surface waters to the deep sea sediments. Marine species ingest or are entangled in plastic debris, which causes severe injuries and death. Of course, apart from my research and my speaking and educating people, whether on YouTube or on Instagram or on podcasts such as my own podcast, Nature Talks, I have been preserving specimens. Over 300 specimens I right now have. I don't know the correct number because there's too many. But each of those specimens, majority of them have died due to natural causes. And behind me, you can see a few of them. An Arabian gazelle skull, a box full of insects, wasps and bees. And I've got specimens that have died due to plastic pollution. A shoveler duck, for example, or a recently captured, a recently preserved seagull specimen. So the problems we are throwing at the natural world is not one. There are many, many countless problems we are throwing on the natural world as of now. So what are the problems? The thing is that since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, we have emitted 2,400 billion tons of carbon dioxide. That's extraordinary, to be honest. And the extraordinary thing here is that over the years, what I've seen is that once we have a species on our target, there is no place on Earth that can hide. We will make sure we push it towards extinction. And if we don't stop, we are going to indeed, send it to extinction. Of course, most of the points that I'll be discussing as of now are from my book that I recently published, The Year It Changed. And so I hope you would take notes of what I'm speaking and join me as we rewild the planet. Of course, the first species of animal that humans eliminated in history lived in Madagascar. It was thought that these birds, while being dangerous, since they, had a kick similar to an ostrich that could open a man's stomach, yet they stood almost twice the size of an ostrich and weighed almost 4 times. They went extinct as a result of humans taking their massive eggs. These were the elephant birds, and their eggs could feed a whole family. And they went extinct sometime between 1000 and 1200 CE. And their eggs shells still lie in Madagascar graveyards, showing the effects of humans. But they weren't alone. On the island of Mauritius in India, in Indian Ocean, Portuguese sailors arrived at the beginning of the 16th century. They discovered large flocks of flightless pigeons, because the large lumbering birds were easy prey. The sailors named them dodos, which allegedly means comic or foolish. The sailors slaughtered and ate a large number of them, and the flesh was rough and unpalatable, according to the reports. But fresh meat of any type was what the seamen sought. Ships from all over the world began to visit the islands in regular basis, hoping to get a piece of the action. And so, by the 1690, the last dodo had been hunted down. Now, of course, we have had extinction crises throughout Earth's history, the ones from the dinosaurs, the Ice Age. But after all those extinctions, something remarkable happened. Species began to build up again, begin to adopt. So we can say that despite the fact that we are sending extraordinary species to extinction, without us, nature will once again rebuild. So Europeans had already begun to settle in the lush areas of Southern Africa at this time, by the 1690s. And they saw immense grasslands teeming with herds of bolabok, a large antelope, and quagga, 84-year relative of the zebra, named for the sound of its barking cry. The quagga had striped forequarters like its zebra relatives, but plain brown hindquarters. Both species were hunted by the colonists for fun, and because the wild herds grazed on the grass they needed for the tamed animals. Both the blauk and the quagga were extinct by the 1883. Now, around the same time, Dutch were attacking large game in South Africa. British farmers in North America were dealing with the passenger pigeon, which was thought to be the most numerous birds at the time. Its flocks were so large that they clouded the sky, obliterating the sun and requiring days to pass. Their weight was so immense that branches snapped beneath them when they roosted in trees at night. Now, of course, despite being murdered in large numbers, you see, their numbers appear to be invulnerable, similar to the oceans. You know, when we look at the oceans, we think, oh my goodness, they're so vast, and whatever we do, we cannot damage them. Indians in competitive hunts had to kill at least 30,000 birds in order to qualify for a reward. I mean, that's extraordinary, you see. And the flocks roamed the countryside in quest of nourishment. Occasionally, several years might pass without a visit to a certain location. Then, all of a sudden, people realized that the birds had not only failed to return for several seasons, but had also gone forever. In 1914, the final survivor, a female named Martha, died in the Cincinnati zoo cage. So as you see, as soon as we got power, we began to eliminate species all over the world. Until a little over a century ago, Australia had a huge native carnivore. Most of us know it. It looked like a striped dog, but it held its offspring in a pouch like kangaroo and other marsupials. It was given the scientific name Tylosinus cynocephalus, which means pouch bearer with wolf head. But most of us nicknamed it the Tasmanian tiger or the thylacine. And we drove it to extinction because it destroyed our sheep. Living specimens were shipped all over the world to be seen and marveled, you know, as a scientific marvel. However, their numbers decreased until only one survived at Hobart Zoo. And that too died in 1936. Of course, these are only a few species that have been extinct since the dodo. And since the 1500s, it is estimated that over 900 species have gone extinct. This comprises of 85 mammals, 159 birds, 35 amphibians, and 80 fish species that have been wiped out by hunters or animal predators that humans have brought with us as we moved over the globe. The splendid poison frog was the most recent species to become extinct. It wasn't, of course, until the turn of the 20th century that people realized the magnitude of the harm we are doing. And you'll be shocked when I tell you that through experiences, I can tell that the natural world is all around us, within our cities, within our homes, right in our faces as face mites. And if we want, we can actually save the animals. We can conserve the planet. It is not too late. But what we must consider is the 9 planetary boundaries. We still can't save the planet. And now, after all those extinctions, I would like to share a story with you on how I witnessed, along with other things that I've read, about successful conservation stories that have helped save near lost species. So you see, European big game hunters, ironically, were among the first to try to put a stop to the extinction crisis. They have competed with one another to obtain the largest horns borne by any given species since they first began exploring the wilder portions of Africa. However, no matter how daring and skilled the chase was, or how precise and lethal the guns they had, previous records were proving hard to duplicate, much alone exceed. The hunters gradually realized what was going on. They were annihilating the same creatures they cherished. The wilderness was not limitless, and one species that big game hunters treasured had nearly vanished from the wild by the 1950s. I mean, once the Apollo mission was launched 50 or so years ago. Before it, we thought that our planet was limitless. There was no edge to our existence, that whatever we do, we cannot put any harm on the planet. But once the astronaut went out there and saw Earth, we saw that it's a blue marble. It's round and it is very small compared to other planets. And we found that in that one shot was the whole of humanity. Nothing else, apart from the astronaut, of course, outside in space. And we saw that in that single shot was the whole of humanity, as I mentioned. We soon realized that our planet was not limitless. There was an edge to our existence. I mean, I began researching 10 years back when I was 8 years back when I was just 10 years old. And the species I looked for, the species that I saw, over time became rarer and harder to find. And now every time I go in a wild place, I think to myself, well, this is the last time I'm seeing these creatures. Will I see them the next time? And there are few species that I've seen decline drastically over the past few years. I mean, the first time when I saw a freshwater Turkish lobster back in Iran they were plentiful of them. People came and caught them for food. And recently, when I visited them last year, it was a graveyard. The shells covered the whole area, you see. And looking on the shore as I walked around this muddy lake, and nearly to my knees was under the mud, all I saw was dead juveniles and plastic and algae growing. I mean, creatures such as crustaceans need, fresh water, need the extraordinary clean water to care, to live a carefree world, to flourish. And the juveniles were dead. How I was able to find a small juvenile, and just imagine these lobsters grow to nearly 14 inches. And all I found was a small juvenile, maybe like a 3 or so, or maximum like a 4-inch long. And that soon also died. Of course, it's sad that I've been able to see a loss of many of the creatures. But I'm also feeling lucky that I can take action for them, that I can save them. I mean, if you see in the videos here, in the pictures here, I've captured a crab here. It's a freshwater crab, and so far I've not found a species that it belongs to. And this too has lost its ecosystem at a dramatic scale. I mean, I've heard from the locals that the location that they lived at, it's a spring, right? It was so deep that people feared they would drown in it. But the last time I visited that, just last year, the maximum height of that, the deepest point of that spring was until my knees. So you see, we are losing biodiversity even when we don't know it. And its impacts are hidden, but they're going to be drastic and dramatic. So, the animal that the European hunters cherished the most was an animal you see in these pictures, an Arabian oryx. The Arabian oryx was an antelope with long, straight horns of unrivaled grace and grandeur. It is, of course, the UAE's national animal. And with that, I've had the opportunity to work and witness something absolutely spectacular for the species. You see, the problems that we are putting on the natural world are dramatic. Plastic pollution, deforestation, climate change, poaching. But equal to those problems are the solutions that we can find, the solutions that we have right now, and how we as a species can save these creatures. You see, despite the fact that the numbers had declined, a few captives of those Arabian oryxes remain in zoos and private collections around Europe. All of the captive individuals were brought together in the Phoenix Zoo in Arizona, where the climate was similar to that of the species' natural habitat, and captive breeding programs commenced. So we had the return of the Arabian oryx. But of course, it's not what I witnessed. What I witnessed was extraordinary because I also live in the UAE and I love its natural habitats. People from the outside think that the UAE is a desert. I mean, it is a desert, of course, but people think that it lacks life. But nearly all my 300 or so specimens are collected from the UAE's deserts and its waters. I mean, even the Arabian gazelle skull behind me is from the UAE itself. So, as extraordinary as it was, because the animal, of course, were acquired from various locations around Arabia, the new herd was genetically diverse, posing little risk of inbreeding. And the number of animals soon grew. And by the 1978, there were enough to risk returning to Arabia and releasing some of them. However, the major influence that I myself was a witness of was made in the UAE by His Highness Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan, an amazing ruler and an amazing natural lover and environmentalist. The Arabian oryx was, of course, in danger of becoming extinct. And he realized that such animals will suffer several threats as a result of increased urbanization, the use of contemporary technology, and non-sustainable human activities. And so, in Al Ain, Sheikh Zayed established a captive breeding program. The program was, of course, for endangered Arabian oryx in 1968. 4 Arabian oryx heads, 2 males and 2 females, were transported from Al Ain to Sir Bani Yas Islands in 1978. This was the true start of the breeding effort of this island, and many other times followed. In February 1999, there were 311 Arabian oryx on the island. And by the end of 2011, there were 450 Arabian oryxes. Sheikh Zayed's programs resulted in the release of the Arabian oryx both inside and beyond the UAE. It was a witness during this shift. And I was witness during this shift myself, because in 2007, there were just 160 individuals. And, but now, when we look at it, there are over 6,900 individuals, making it the world's biggest population, thanks to His Highness Sheikh Zayed's efforts. Today, approximately 1,000 Arabian oryx wander the deserts that formerly served as their habitat. The conservation movement had begun. And as I showed you in these images, I myself am here taking a picture with an Arabian oryx. And many of them, I think there was around 20 in a herd. And I was asked to go to this Al Marmum Nature Reserve to film and speak about these animals. And they were still protected. I mean, that's extraordinary. Their numbers are still increased and they are still protected. That must happen for all species on Earth. We must protect every single animal in the world, similarly as we protect the species, that are endangered, and similarly as we protect the human populations itself. So, again, we know about the panda as well. And in China, another conservation story was beginning to unfold. The giant panda, which was dangerously endangered at the time, became a symbol of the pressing need for conservation. Attempts by zoos in Europe and the United States to breed them in captivity failed miserably, and it appeared that the species was on the verge of extinction. However, Chinese zoologists studying captive animals figured out the species' complicated breeding cycles and began raising them in large enough numbers that some of them could, of course, be returned to the wild, to the bamboo woods where they originated. So, as we can see, with humans came destruction. Even the largest habitat and the so-called unlimited oceans were not safe. And we already see the impacts of, let's say, plastic pollution on the oceans. I mean, whenever you visit a beach, you can see, my goodness, there's a huge amount of plastic there. and it in return affects wildlife in the most drastic way. One of my recent researches was about the impacts of plastic pollution on wildlife. Why do animals eat plastics? And what are its impacts? And the result of us throwing, plastic in the oceans have resulted in plastic being found in our own blood, lungs, and placenta as well. The impacts of this microplastic within our systems is unknown, but we know that its impacts are going to be dramatic. We can see similar impact on species, loss of genetic diversity, loss of fertility, and much more other issues. So, as I was mentioning, when we stand on land, and we look out at the sea, it's just this flat blue thing. But in fact, the open ocean is really the largest biome on the planet. And it is home to the largest species, the largest animal to ever walk the planet. Bigger than the biggest dinosaurs, and yet a gentle giant. Whales. The world's largest mammals, greatly outweighing even the greatest dinosaurs, were likewise endangered. The great whales have been hunted for millennia by brave men in canoes using nothing more than a handled harpoon. To begin with, the balance of power was with the whales, because if the harpoon went in the whales, the whales thought, oh, well, let's say, let me dive, it would take the whole ship with them and the crew. Not only did they dwarf their human hunters, but they were able to dive within seconds and escaped into depths of the oceans. But in the late 19th and early 20th century, the vast majority of people who saw whales in nature were whalers. They were not whale watchers, but they were whale hunters. They killed for oil and baleen. The stiff fringed bowhead and sperm whales, have plates hanging off their upper jaw of some of the whales. And the whalers' main targets were right whales, bowheads, and sperm whales, slower swimmers who would float when harpooned. But blue whales, the largest of all the whales, would, dive deep and swim fast, up to 30 miles an hour fast, faster than the wind-powered ships could chase them. Even if whalers had managed to find their mark, without steam-powered winches, they would never have hauled a 200-ton blue whale carcass from the depth. That all changed in the 1870s with Norwegian whalers, Svend Fogh. We invented whales. We invented, of course, ways of tracking whales down and stabbing them with harpoons that had explosive heads. Factories, some floating, some on land, were built that were capable of processing several giant carcasses in a day. Whaling had become industrialized. From an estimated 350,000 individuals in the pre-whaling years, some 99% of the populations was wiped out. The first whales, of course, evolved as, land-living creatures. The size of the terrestrial animals is limited by the mechanical strength of the bone. Because the gravity acts on them and the weight really affects the joints, so they cannot hold that much weight. And above a certain weight, the bone breaks. But aquatic animals, however, are supported by water. So whales can grow much larger than any land animal. If you've seen, if you have dived in water, or I've got, of course, all of us have swum at least once, we can see that when we enter the water, it's similar to entering space. We are weightless. We can go in any direction by a flick of our fin or by a movement of our legs. So you see, that's the extraordinary nature of a pollution underwater itself. So you see, the whales can grow much bigger than any land animal, and they do. Their nostrils migrated to the top of their heads, their forelimbs and tails became paddles, and their hind limbs eventually vanished. For tens of millions of years, they were important members of the complex ecosystems, of the open ocean, and they still are as important, crisscrossing the seas in their hundreds of thousands. A key problem, restricting life in the open ocean is the availability of nutrients. Where conditions are right, plants and animals live in the surface of waters, and when they die, they drift continuously downwards as marine snow. When nutrients are not freely available, the surface waters of the oceans can be almost sterile. Just as land plants need fertilizers, as well as sun and water, so do phytoplankton. The photosynthesizing foundation of the ocean food web need nitrogenous compounds in the sunlit surface waters if they are to thrive. There are places in the oceans where the decomposed marine snow is sterilized and carried upwards by the currents flowing over submarine mountains and ranges. And here the phytoplankton and hence fish populations can flourish. While the rest of the open oceans will remain a vast blue desert. Were it not for the whales, if they didn't, fertilize the oceans. They are so big that, when they dive to feed in the depths or rise to the surface to breathe, they create a giant steering of water around them that helps keep nutrients near the surface. And they create, of course, as I mentioned, a steering of the water. This whale pump, as we call it, is often termed in now recognized as a significant process in maintaining the fertility of the open oceans. Yet although dolphins and cetaceans are still being hunted to this day, yet animals like whales and dolphins' excrements alone are full of nutrients that these are eaten later, by birds and later carried away to land to fertilize the soil for food and vegetations that we eat. So you see the dependence of us on whales, despite, let's say, myself living miles away from the ocean, is extraordinary. The whales eat the whales' droppings and then later come and fertilize our food crops. So despite the whales, living a lot far from us and we don't get to see them, as I mentioned, their lives are touching ours. And the oceans of the Holocene needed its whales to remain productive. In the 20th century, men killed close to 3 million of these whales. More than 330,000 blue whales were slaughtered in the Southern Ocean alone in the first half of the century. Whales cannot withstand such a high level of hunting for long. Given the chance, they are very long-lived creatures. Sperm whales can live up to 70 years. The females are not sexually mature until they are 9. And their pregnancy lasts for over a year. And they give birth only once every 3 to 5 years. So hunting them really does affect their populations. As industrial whalers, became more and more efficient, they selected the largest animals when they had the choice, for they were the most profitable. But you see, the whales are not extinct. The whales are still all around us. If you visit, let's say, even when you visit the UAE's Abu Dhabi's waters, you can see dolphins and sometimes whales as well. So what happened to them? The return of the whales. So in the late 1960s, an American biologist, Roger Payne, turned from recording the ultrasonic sounds of bats to investigating claims from the US Navy that there were songs in the oceans. The Navy had set up listening stations for seabed submarines, and as well as the signature sound of propellers. They were detecting strange, almost musical sounds. Payne discovered that the chief source of these songs were the 5,000 or so humpback whales that were still alive at the time. His recordings revealed that humpback songs are long and complex, and of such low frequencies that they can carry for hundreds of kilometers through the water. Humpbacks living in the same part of the ocean learn their songs from each other. Each song has its own distinct theme on which each individual male will invent his own variation, right? And of course, so the way our language has changed over time. We have adopted from a very formal language to nearly using slang nearly every day. So there also changes over time. Whereas you might say have a musical culture. Pain releases recording on the vinyl disc in the 1970s, and they became hugely popular, transporting public's perception of the whales. Previously, of course, it was sometimes governments or powerful individuals that saved species from extinction. But the whales' songs were interpreted as the mournful songs of cries for help. And an anti-whaling campaign began with a few passionate supporters and rapidly developed into a mainstream activity. Now it appears that most, if not all, whale species are beginning to regain their numbers. So you see, the whales have recovered, and this shows the power that we have. We might be, sending species to extinction, but we have the equal power of saving them. And yes, we actually do have the power of saving them indeed. So, and it's in the hands of every single one of us to save the planet and its unique biodiversity. Now, of course, high up in the lush mist-shrouded mountains of East Africa, perched on the edge of the Great Rift Valley, are a collection of volcanic peaks known as the Virunga Mountains. Up until the early 1900s, few people had ventured into these mystical highlands, straddling Rwanda, Uganda, and DRC. But explorers had heard rumors of a man-like creature living high up on the mountain slopes. Our so-called relatives, closest relatives to ourselves. In the 1902, a German explorer named Captain Robert von Beringe ventured into the rainforest, returning with stories of his elusive creatures that few people could believe. As proof of his encounter, he brought back the skin of one of the creatures there, a mountain gorilla he had found. It wasn't until the parts had been analyzed in Europe that the animal was proclaimed a new subspecies of gorilla, and one that was much, much larger than any ape previously discovered. From then on, the Virunga Mountains have held a powerful lure for people all over the world. And in 1950, the area became the first national park to be proclaimed in Africa. Of course, similarly to the species, of whales or pandas, dodos, Arabian oryxes, there is, of course, another extraordinary conservation story. The mountain gorillas did return. After a century of habitat destruction, poaching, and disease, today there are just 880 mountain gorillas remaining in the Virunga Mountains. An ecosystem shared by the 3 countries. Their survival relies on a close relationship between the forces of conservation, community, and tourists. The money spent on permits to see the gorillas is put back into their protection and in assisting the surrounding communities with education and uplifting. Saving the gorillas has become one of the most successful conservation models in Africa's history and has led to steady rise in gorilla numbers from all-time lows of 620 individuals in 1989 to around 880 or so, or even more individuals today. So we can, wipe a species overnight, but we can also save them. Now, after all these journeys from Africa to Dubai to the whales in the ocean, let's once again buckle our seats and travel now to India. Here lives an animal whose majesty shadows the forests. The distribution of a creature called the Asiatic lion. once found widely in West and South Asia, it dwindled to a single population in Gir Forest National Park and wildlife sanctuaries in India. The population of Gir declined to 18 animals in 1893, just 18, but increased due to the protection and conservation efforts to 284 in 1994. So we can say that once again, we've got the return of another species, the Asiatic lion. So the Gir Wildlife Sanctuary is now, highly populated with lions. The 2015 census showed the strength to the 523 lions. There are numerous deaths in the population annually because of ever-increasing competition between the human and animal overcrowdings. Sometimes, let's say, especially in India and countries with livestock and wild species, coinciding and coming together face to face, having a problem with each other. Usually, I've heard reports of farmers actually poisoning livestock and that kill native animals, let's say tigers and Asiatic lions in this case. Of course, the Asiatic lion prides require large territories, but there is limited space in the Gir sanctuary, which is boxed in all sides by heavy human habitations. Gir lions have started moving outwards from sanctuaries and establishing homes outside their protection areas. This is nice, but it can also affect them if humans suddenly see them as threats. The lions are now spread over 16,000 square kilometers in the vicinity of the 1050 villages in 4 continuous districts. We spoke about countless conservation stories. There are many more. I can talk for days about the conservation stories, successful ones that I've seen and that I've been a part of. But more than that, we must, as individuals, learn how we can invest strategies and adopt and make our planet habitable for both humans and animals. Last year in the month of Feb, I spoke in TEDx. It was my TEDx speech that was the foundation of my book, The Year Earth Changed. And I spoke about my experience the same way I do in my book. And of course, my book is available on Amazon in case you all want to take a look at it. And it was extraordinary, because I got to understand that the people do want to save the animals. And so I made an acronym and I made a program called the Rewild program. So this falls under my Rewild program, Rewilding Our Planet. And it is extraordinary actually, because each word of this Rewild is broken down, each letter is broken down into different words. And I'm going to break down each word for you one by one. So we have got first R. R breaks down into regenerate. We saw this examples of regeneration in the many of the conservation stories that we right now spoke about. And as I've written in my book, we must start helping to regenerate the wildlife that is alive today. And this is the first step of rewilding the world. If we are to turn the tide of nature loss and protect the natural world for present and future generations, we must set a worldwide target of reversing biodiversity loss to ensure a nature-positive society by 2030. Now, a question that you might ask yourselves is, how can we rewild the planet? How can we regenerate the wild populations? It is extraordinary when I tell you that animals have got extraordinary adaptive skills if we give them time to adopt, and they are ever more changing. We are ever more changing as well. In order to allow animals to regenerate, we must stop cutting down forests. We must let wild spaces reclaim their lost space. I mean, think about it. Close your eyes. We have cut down many trees. And in doing so, we have wiped out many creatures, many hectares of land. So we have enough land for ourselves, for our populations. And so by stopping continuing to damage, by stopping the continuity of damaging our ecosystems, we can help regenerate the wild populations. One thing that I've witnessed over the years is if we give animals a chance, they will have an extraordinary recovery. I mean, we can simply even have breeding programs within our homes. I mean, look at this creature, for example. It's a spider. I'm not sure if you can see it. But I had captured this just a month back when a person was about to kill it. And it is very much alive, you see. And I've also, in the past few years, bred butterflies and moths and released them. I've got friends in UK that do the same. So saving the planet, regenerating wildlife, is in the hands of every single one of us. It's not bound to governments or powerful individuals. We all have a role. And of course, the best way we can regenerate wild creatures is becoming sustainable, adopting sustainable lives. Because honestly, you see, when we think of sustainability, we often think of what things we must give up and forget what we gain. But a sustainable future is full of gains. I mean, look at all these children. I presented my specimens in my school and the Children's Academy last year. And it's extraordinary that the 5,000 children who are all curious about the wonders of nature wanted to see how they can save them. So saving our planet is possible, and if we adopt sustainable lifestyles, it's true, we must give up a few things, but for the better. We're going to have a world in which we can find nature right on our doorsteps. It's a world in which people are treated more equally. They can find more affordable conditions of living, and poverty is dramatically reduced. So yes, a sustainable future is full of gains. Now, the next word to rewild, of course, the next letter to rewild after regenerate is evolve. Now, evolve must be a very, evolution itself must be a very confusing letter for you. How can we evolve, you see? But it's extraordinary because, the second word in rewilding our planet is evolution. And I don't mean evolution by evolving physically, but evolving the conditions in which we live, evolving our cities, making our cities more, welcoming to wildlife, planting more trees within our cities, providing, bridges for wildlife to pass from the roads, because many animals die due to being hit by cars and highways and such. And basically mimicking nature, having nature as our role model, building houses that, help us save the creatures, save the animals, and bring them to our cities. Because if we make and if we evolve our cities, what I basically mean that we are doing is that we are creating an extraordinary, huge sanctuary within our cities in which we are a part of, sanctuaries in which animals can freely move around our cities, sanctuary in which we can see wildlife right on our doorsteps. And it's simple. We have got the solutions to save the planet. And that includes electric cars. Because you see, electric cars, apart from not releasing carbon, they are less noisy. And we know that there are many creatures around the world that rely on the sense of hearing to capture their prey. Bats are one example. So with all these noises within our cities, bats who live in our cities cannot live very well. They cannot live in the best of their population. They cannot grow. And with less noise, bats will start to return. other creatures will start to return. And this will be cleaner condition for ourselves. I mean, many people die due to air pollution every year. So by evolving our cities, such as, let's say, the view you can see, which is in Singapore, we can help in the evolution of our cities and help in the return of the wildlife. I mean, just imagine waking up every morning, looking outside, seeing a native bird having a nest outside your window, or let's say opening your window while studying and listening to these all extraordinary sounds of wildlife outside. So we can evolve our cities, and we are already beginning to do so. I mean, the UAE itself is doing a lot. The Singapore itself is an extraordinarily great example. I mean, I cannot stress on that point as much. And I mean, if we also cannot evolve that fast, we can start by doing, small steps, making sanctuaries, and making houses with space within their roofs and within their walls that we can make plants in that can provide a home for different creatures and habitats for butterflies, insects, and such. So evolution is another key step. And you all can take part in evolution. I mean, evolution itself can be evolution of life, of yours. And an evolution of life of yours, I mean, by buying less plastic, cycling and walking as much as you can. I mean, that'll make you more fit. And even if you say that, well, I already live far from wildlife, why should I care? But then, we are dependent on wildlife for everything. The food we eat, the air we breathe, the water we drink, the clothes we wear, all are at the end related to the wildlife that are outside the cities. And the thing is that it is believed that even looking outside when walking on your way to school or work, looking at trees, will give you this sense of peace and well-being, which is again another extraordinary thing. So the third letter in the evolution, after evolution, in the rewild word, is welcoming wildlife. And this is the biggest step, the biggest achievement, because at this point we have to be able to get ready ourselves to welcome wildlife with open arms, provide them the necessary food they need, the necessary sources of water they need, the necessary homes they need. And in the previous step, we were evolving our cities. So gradually wildlife will start returning. I mean, we have got situations in which the wildlife has taken over the city. Like, let's say the Chernobyl, wonderful example. I mean, it's correct that the human population has completely been wiped out from there, but animals are starting to, and have already started to flourish there, and some also very rare. So if we stop the harm to nature, if we open our arms to nature, the wildlife will return. And a part of returning wildlife is investing in renewable energy. Of course, investing in renewable energy sources such as solar, wind, and geothermal can help reduce the amount of greenhouse gases released into the atmosphere. This can help, of course, reduce the effects of climate change and make the planet much more habitable for both humans and animals. Now, part of welcoming wildlife and evolution is investing in green infrastructure. Investing in green infrastructure as green roofs, urban forests, and green walls can help reduce the urban heat, island effect, improve air quality, and reduce water runoff. As I mentioned earlier, having buildings with which you can plant trees in and which can provide habitats for different creatures is equally extraordinary. Now, the next letter is, of course, I, innovation. We already have the mind of creating innovations and acquiring innovations and technologies that can help save the planet. And one of the greatest examples is using drones for planting trees in uninhabitable or inaccessible regions. And technology can help us, recycle and reuse most of our products, making, plastic into bricks or plastic into shirts and clothing. And it can also provide us the opportunity to, build bricks that have been recently investigated that have got holes in them, providing homes for bumblebees and other insects that need, those conditions to survive. And so that's what innovations can help us mimic nature even more, because we use technology nearly every day. Most of us use technology every single moment of our lives. We cannot give it off. We cannot give it up at all. I mean, even when we go for a walk, we've got a smartwatch on our hands, which tells us our heartbeat, our calories, and such. So we are not far from technology. And we've already solved many problems using technology. I mean, captive breeding programs, solutions to conservation problems, and much, much more. Vertical farming, using technology to farm, and much more. Technology can help us save and rewild the planet. So we must invest in technologies that are helping conserve the planet and rewild the world. Of course, the general term for rewild is returning the wilderness and repopulating our planet with wildlife and different wild organisms. And of course, this acronym of rewild can be broken down in your own ways. These are just the steps I'm talking of from my own experiences. Now the next letter is L. And to me, it's the key impact, the key effort we can have in saving the planet. Learning. I believe that understanding a problem is the key step to finding solutions. If we understand, we can care. If we care, then only we can save. And as we can see on the screen, before we come up with practical solutions, we must first comprehend the issues and how nature works. We must begin to learn. Thus, the letter L becomes the fifth letter in Rewild program. Now, learning comes in different aspects. I myself, I'm an educator. So I educate people on different creatures, different wild animals, biodiversity laws, and my own research. And this includes getting my specimens close to the youth, to see them, to understand them, and to feel what it feels to be in a wild world. And they get to learn that the problems, what problems are faced by those creatures. I mean, I have a ring-necked pheasant that has been killed by hunting. I mean, I tried to save it, but it had an air gun bullet inside. So they were really saddened when they saw the results of pollution can have. Or plastic pollution, freshwater pollution, chemical runoff, climate change. All these problems, all the species I preserve are indeed the result of human-caused problems, and that they've all got a story to tell. So when we start learning, we can spread awareness. I mean, I myself spread awareness through my YouTube channel called The Wildlife Focus, or through Instagram, which is my own name, Rafan Firuzi, or through my podcast called Nature Talks, in which I invite experts to give us solutions on different problems, you see. So we can also learn to, invest in different agricultural ways, sustainable agricultural ways, and investing in green technologies. So we reach the last letter of Rewild, which is discontinue. Discontinue is simple. We must stop buying products that harm nature. We must stop doing harm to nature. We must stop poaching. And this provides us all the opportunities for the youth, especially, to start recycling, to plant trees, to create composting programs, create a sustainable garden in your community, start a carpooling program, educate your peers about the importance of reducing the carbon footprint, advocate for renewable energy, create a green business in your community, and create a blog on a website to spread awareness. Now, we have spoke about all the ways in which we can save the planet. Saving the planet is the simple step. We all have a role to take. And rewilding the planet is in the hands of every single one of us. So join me and the youth all over the world in saving our beautiful planet. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Efan. Thank you very much for a wonderful presentation. And we've been able to see how we can help our Earth and save our planet by repopulating the population of diversity loss, and also being concerned and intentional about our environment. It is more than just saving our animals by creating sanctuaries for them. It is more of your daily input, what you do on a daily to help, like how you properly dispose your waste and your consciousness of the carbon you emit in your space. Thank you very much, Afan, for your wonderful presentation. I'd like to know if anyone has any question for you. And after that, we'll round off with the webinar. Thank you so much for a lovely presentation. So do I have anybody with questions? You can put the questions in the chat below. Thank you very much. So in the absence of question, we'll call it a day. Thank you very much, Irfan. You can reach out to him on his social media, and also you can add us on LinkedIn and on all our social media platforms. Thank you very much. Mr. Mayowa. Okay, I think Albright Olaiton has a question. So you can unmute and ask your question, please. Olaiton, I'm waiting for your question, please. You can unmute and ask your question. So in the absence of every question, I think we've come to the end of this webinar. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you, Irfan, for an educative presentation. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, and wishing you all the best for all your projects. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.